Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Mr. Midnight Lullabies. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep, but before you drift off, I'd like for you to leave a comment, letting me know where in the world you are listening from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax and dive into tonight's cases. Story 1. Broomfield, Colorado. A quiet suburb just north of Denver. Rows of tidy houses, tree-lined streets, families walking dogs, neighbors waving hello. It's the kind of place where you don't expect chaos. It's the kind of place where things seem safe. On December 14, 2023, emergency services were called to a home on Tamarack Street. Inside, 47-year-old Crystal Krug was found dead. She had been stabbed. There were signs of a struggle. Nothing stolen. No sign of forced entry. At first glance, it was easy to assume the worst, a violent break-in, maybe a stalker who had followed through on threats. But as detectives moved through the house, that theory began to slip away. The evidence wasn't adding up the way they expected. The timeline was off. The patterns didn't match a stranger's behavior. The deeper they looked, the more they realized this wasn't random. This wasn't sudden. And Crystal's killer may not have come from the outside at all. This is the story of a husband who built a false reality, one message at a time. A story of fear, control, and deception, where the truth was buried beneath a carefully constructed lie. Daniel and Crystal Krug had been married for over a decade. From the outside, their life was ordinary. Two working professionals, living in a modest home in Broomfield, Colorado. But those close to them said the relationship had changed in recent years. Crystal had begun pulling away. Friends noticed at first, subtle shifts in her tone when she mentioned Daniel, quiet pauses in conversation when his name came up. At work, she was described as private, composed. At home, she was more reserved. She had started sleeping in a separate bedroom. In private, she began telling close friends that she was thinking about leaving. There was no physical violence. Nothing that could be proven. But there was a distance between them. One she didn't feel safe talking about openly. Then, the messages started. They were anonymous. The first one came through a social media account, a name she didn't recognize. It was vague, threatening. She blocked it. Then came another. This time via email. Then more. Each more graphic than the last. They were disturbing, filled with personal details, things that only someone close to her would know. The language was explicit, threatening. Whoever it was, knew where she lived. Where she worked. What time she got home. At first, Crystal thought it might be an old ex-boyfriend. Someone with a grudge. That idea made sense. It was someone from her past. That's what she told police when she filed a report. She handed over her phone. The messages were real. She told friends she was scared. She started checking her locks more often. Looking over her shoulder when she left work. Her home didn't feel like home anymore. And the person she was most vulnerable with, the person who shared her address, was watching it all happen. The messages kept coming. And each one drove Crystal deeper into fear. She tried to maintain normalcy. She didn't want to burden her family. She didn't want to accuse the wrong person. At times, she wondered if she was being paranoid. The police took her seriously. But with no concrete leads, there wasn't much they could do. The messages were routed through encrypted apps, burner email addresses, masked IPs. The sender was always one step ahead. Daniel was supportive, at least on the surface. He offered to help. Told her she was right to be cautious. Told others he was concerned for her safety. He even suggested moving security cameras around the house. She agreed. She was grateful. But she didn't know what he was really doing behind the screen. What no one realized was that Daniel wasn't trying to protect Christelle. He was orchestrating the entire thing. Every message. Every account. Every anonymous threat. Investigators would later discover the digital trail, carefully hidden under layers of deception. But in the moment, all Christelle knew was that someone out there had their eyes on her. And that her husband was the one helping her through it. She didn't feel safe. She started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. And in private conversations with friends, she admitted she was starting to question everything. Not just the messages. Not just the fear. But the people closest to her. At the time, there was no physical proof. No red flags that screamed danger loud enough to be heard over the hum of everyday life. Christelle kept going. She went to work. She took care of her responsibilities. But her instincts were trying to tell her something. Christelle believed she was being hunted by someone from her past. What she couldn't see was that the person writing those threats was the man in the next room. December 2023. The messages stopped. But only because Daniel Krug had made a decision. Thursday, December 14, 2023. It was cold in Broomfield. The kind of still, gray afternoon where time feels like it slows down. Christelle Krug was finishing her workday. No one she spoke to sensed anything unusual. She didn't cancel plans. She didn't sound nervous. She didn't say anything about Daniel. Just before 5 p.m., she left work and drove home. It would be the last time anyone saw her alive. What exactly happened inside the house that evening would only be pieced together after the fact. There were no witnesses. No neighbors reported hearing anything. But what police and forensic investigators discovered painted a chilling picture. According to the medical examiner, Christelle was first struck on the head. Blunt force trauma. The blow was hard enough to incapacitate her. Then, she was stabbed multiple times. There was no sign of forced entry, no robbery. Her car was still in the driveway. Her purse was untouched. The scene wasn't consistent with a break-in. It was consistent with something else. Something personal. The official time of death was estimated to be shortly after 5:15 p.m. Daniel Krug didn't call 911. He didn't report the attack. In fact, he didn't call anyone. 4 hours. Instead, Daniel left the home. What he did during that time remains unclear. There was a delay between the murder and when law enforcement arrived, a delay that investigators would later say gave him time to clean up, change clothes, and control what details got out first. When officers were finally called to the home, they found Christelle unresponsive. Paramedics pronounced her dead at the scene. The home was quiet. Too quiet. There was no struggle in the living room. No signs of a frantic exit. The signs of violence were contained, deliberate. Controlled. Daniel told authorities he had come home and found her like that. That he didn't know what happened. That maybe the stalker had finally followed through on the threats. But when detectives began asking questions, Daniel's story didn't hold. Investigators examined his timeline. His movements. His devices. And when they checked the surveillance camera he had once insisted be installed for Christelle's protection, they noticed something else. The footage was missing. Deleted. That wasn't just a red flag. It was a move that required effort, intent. Police obtained warrants for Daniel's electronics. What they found would unravel the version of events he had tried to present. Christelle had spent her last months terrified of someone she believed was stalking her. She went to police. She tried to protect herself. She leaned on her husband. The truth, the hard truth, was that Daniel Krug had created the threat himself. And when that illusion began to wear off, when Christelle started talking about leaving him for good, he chose a final act of control. In the days after Christelle's death, investigators began to trace the messages. One IP address kept coming up, again and again. The initial shock of Christel Krug's death hadn't faded when the Broomfield Police Department made the decision to go deeper. Something about the scene didn't fit. Something about Daniel's account didn't feel right. The metadata on those files linked them to Daniel's user account. It showed dates, edit histories, and a chilling level of premeditation. In another folder, investigators found internet searches. One of the most damning. How to frame someone for harassment. There were dozens more. Best way to send anonymous threats. Can police trace deleted messages? What happens if your spouse is murdered and you're the only witness? Each search, a breadcrumb. And Daniel had left a trail that pointed only in one direction. Christel had told friends she feared she was being watched. That someone was trying to break her down. She was right. What she didn't know was that the person behind it was the one she had once trusted most, and that he wasn't just watching. He was planning. The morning of December 21, 2023, began like any other in Broomfield, Colorado. Cold air. Bare trees. A quiet neighborhood preparing for the holidays. But at approximately 7 a.m., that quiet was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on gravel and the knock of a police officer at a front door. Daniel Krug answered in a t-shirt. Officers informed him they had a warrant. This time, it wasn't for evidence. It was for his arrest. He didn't resist. He didn't ask why. He didn't protest. Neighbors later said they saw him step into the patrol car without saying a word. Inside the house, investigators continued their work. They collected remaining devices. Notes. Handwritten scraps. Even clothing. Daniel's behavior in the hours following Christel's murder had left more questions than answers. But by the time he was brought into custody, the digital evidence was overwhelming. The official charges were filed that same day: first-degree murder, stalking, and tampering with physical evidence. Prosecutors described a pattern of psychological manipulation, digital deception, and ultimately, fatal violence. The case would move quickly. It had to. For those who knew Christel, the arrest didn't come as a relief, not right away. It came with shock, grief, and disbelief that someone so close to her had orchestrated such a calculated betrayal. Daniel's co-workers at the hospital where he worked as a physician assistant described him as mild-mannered, professional, reserved. But nothing in his demeanor had hinted at the chaos he was sowing behind the scenes. In the days following his arrest, more details emerged. Prosecutors revealed that Daniel had impersonated an ex-boyfriend of Christel's, creating fake accounts to send threatening messages, some of which appeared to come from people she hadn't spoken to in years. His goal, they said, was to isolate Christel, damage her reputation, and gain control over her emotionally, all under the guise of being her protector. And when he realized that illusion was slipping, he turned violent. Christel had filed at least one police report about the harassment before her death. She never knew it led back to Daniel. She never had the chance to confront him. And now, she never would. Daniel Krug was held without bond in the Broomfield County Jail as the community waited for answers. What would follow would be a courtroom drama unlike anything the quiet Colorado town had seen. Daniel Krug stood trial in March 2024, less than 3 months after Christel's death. The courtroom was packed. Friends, family, journalists. Some had flown in from out of state. Most had come simply to see justice done. Daniel pleaded not guilty. His defense team argued that there was no direct witness to the crime. No murder weapon had ever been recovered. And they maintained that someone else, possibly Christel's so-called stalker, had committed the murder. But the prosecution had already dismantled that theory before opening statements. They presented a timeline built from metadata, surveillance logs, internet history, the deleted footage from Daniel's home system, dozens of fake email accounts, all traced back to the same devices in Daniel's possession. And they had Christel's voice too, through texts, emails, and voicemails, each one showing a woman increasingly frightened, confused, and isolated. Not from an outside threat, but from someone she was living with. It was a portrait not just of abuse, but of control. A slow, calculated erasure of confidence, until Christille was questioning everything, except the person right next to her. One of the most powerful moments came during the testimony of a digital forensics expert. He walked the jury through the chain of custody, how the data was pulled, what it revealed, and how only one person had access to it, Daniel Krug. Then came Christille's journal entries. Read aloud by her sister. One by one, they documented her growing fear, and her growing doubt that Daniel was being truthful about the stalker. One entry, just weeks before her death, read, "If I end up hurt, I don't know if I can trust what Daniel's telling me anymore." The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours. On March 15, 2024, Daniel Krug was found guilty on all charges, first-degree murder, stalking, and tampering with evidence. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Christille's family, there was no celebration, only a grim sense of finality. Her sister told reporters, "We came here for answers. We leave here with grief. But at least now, we can begin to grieve honestly. Without doubt. Without lies." Christille Krug was 47 years old. A mother. A friend. A professional. A woman who tried to protect herself with the information she had. But no one ever told her that the person feeding her that information was the one she needed protection from. And that truth took everything. Story 2. April 2025, Tenino, Washington. A small, tight-knit town. The kind of place where people know each other's names, where neighbors still wave as they pass, and where a single missed phone call can feel like a warning bell. Marcia Norman, 82 years old, was a familiar presence in her community. A mother, grandmother, and friend. She was active. Independent. She had lived in the same home for decades. And she kept close ties with her children and grandchildren, never going long without checking in. But in early April, those daily check-ins suddenly stopped. Calls to her cell phone went unanswered. No texts. No social media posts. At first, her family assumed it was a fluke. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she was resting. But as hours turned to days, concern turned to fear. By April 4th, relatives officially reported her missing. When law enforcement entered Marcia's home, they found no obvious signs of a struggle. Her car was still in the driveway. Her glasses, which she needed to read and move about comfortably, were sitting right there on the kitchen counter. Something wasn't right. Those who knew Marcia couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't just someone leaving town without notice. This was out of character. Deeply out of character. And soon, investigators would uncover details that pointed not only to her recent activities, but to the person she was last seen with. A man she trusted. A man she had hired for help around the house. A man with a troubling past. This is the story of Marcia Norman. A story about trust, misjudgment, and the search for answers when the person you love suddenly disappears. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Marcia Norman was in regular contact with family and friends. She was reportedly in good spirits, chatting with loved ones and making plans for the week ahead. According to relatives, she had recently been spending time with someone she knew well, her handyman, Jeffrey Ziz. For years, he had done small projects around her home. He had even prayed with her on occasion. She considered him trustworthy. Polite. Friendly. He called her Miss Marcia. She paid him for his work, appreciated his help, and welcomed his presence. But at least one interaction between them had caused her concern. Marcia had confided in someone that she had once woken up to find Ziz standing inside her bedroom, uninvited. When she confronted him, she made it clear that certain boundaries needed to be respected. According to what she told family, she wasn't angry. Just firm. She expected respect. Despite that unsettling moment, she continued to hire him. Maybe it was convenience. Maybe it was trust. Or maybe she didn't believe he meant any harm. On April 1st, 2025, a Monday, Marcia had dinner with Ziz. That would be the last confirmed time anyone saw her alive. From that point forward, her phone went silent. She didn't respond to texts. She didn't answer calls. And she missed a routine check-in with one of her children the following day. When a family member visited her home and couldn't reach her, they sensed something was off. It wasn't just the absence, it was the silence. Marcia wasn't someone who just disappeared. She wasn't someone who left her family wondering. By April 4th, a missing persons report had been filed with the Thurston County Sheriff's Office. Officers were dispatched to her home for a wellness check. They found the house locked, no sign of forced entry. Inside, everything looked relatively normal at first glance. But it didn't add up. Marcia's purse was missing. Her medications were gone. But both of her cars were still parked outside. Her glasses, something she rarely went without, were still inside the house. To detectives, the details didn't point toward a planned trip. There were no travel arrangements. No notes left behind. No financial activity on her cards. The case was escalated. And the focus soon shifted to the last person known to have seen her, Jeffrey Ziz. By April 5, 2025, detectives in Thurston County had begun a formal missing persons investigation into the disappearance of Marcia Norman. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, checked local hospitals, contacted nearby law enforcement agencies, and followed standard protocol. But from the outset, there were no signs that Marcia had simply walked away from her life. No recent purchases. No bus tickets. No digital footprint. Her phone remained off. Her bank accounts were untouched. And there was no activity on her social security or medical records. Family members were adamant, Marcia had not left voluntarily. Investigators turned back to the last confirmed person to see her, Jeffrey Ziz. Ziz wasn't a stranger to law enforcement. He had a criminal history dating back several years. In 2021, he had been arrested on multiple counts, including child rape and incest. At the time, he was affiliated with Calvary Chapel of North Thurston, where he had presented himself as a pastor. That role ended shortly after the charges came to light. Ziz ultimately pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of child molestation in the third degree. He was convicted and placed on probation, with restrictions that included regular check-ins with a probation officer and a requirement to remain within the state of Washington. Despite this background, he had continued to offer handyman services and advertised as being faith-based and trustworthy. To Marcia, and perhaps to others in the community, he was simply the man who fixed things around the house. When investigators questioned Ziz, he admitted to having dinner with Marcia on April 1st. He said they'd shared a meal together at her home, and then he left. According to him, that was the last time he saw her. But something about his story didn't sit right. Detectives began checking his movements in the days following her disappearance. What they found raised new questions. Records showed that within days of Marcia going missing, Ziz had acquired materials typically used for construction, including lumber, insulation, tarps, and bags of concrete. Receipts from local hardware stores and surveillance footage confirmed the purchases. He had also been spending time at a property in Olympia, one that didn't belong to him but where he was reportedly staying temporarily. This location would soon become central to the investigation. At the same time, police executed a search warrant at Ziz's known residence. There, they uncovered what they described as deeply troubling written material, a 5-page letter, in Ziz's own handwriting, which allegedly outlined a violent plan involving a woman he referred to only as a customer. The details in the letter included graphic descriptions of physical and sexual assault, and references to drugging the victim. Detectives noted disturbing similarities between the letter's contents and Marcia Norman's disappearance. This letter, coupled with his recent purchases and prior convictions, made Ziz a person of significant interest. But there was one major complication: by April 6, Ziz had disappeared. He was no longer at his home. He wasn't answering his phone. He had not reported to his probation officer. He had violated his court-mandated travel restrictions and was now officially in violation of his probation. A regional manhunt was quietly initiated. Law enforcement agencies across multiple counties were alerted. A warrant was issued for his arrest, not yet in connection to Marcia Norman's case, but for the probation violation. Then, on April 8, a break. Ziz was located hundreds of miles away in Missoula, Montana, alone. He was arrested without incident and held on the outstanding warrant. He refused to speak with investigators. Back in Washington, detectives now faced the pressing question: if Ziz had nothing to do with Marcia's disappearance, why had he left the state? Why had he purchased construction materials just days after their last dinner? And what had he been doing on that rural property in Olympia? The search was about to intensify. And it would lead authorities to a site no one was prepared for. The search for Marcia Norman had officially become a criminal investigation. And with Jeffrey Ziz in custody across state lines, detectives were on borrowed time. They needed to gather evidence, and they needed to know exactly where he'd been in the days after Marcia vanished. Using store receipts and surveillance footage, investigators began piecing together his movements. They tracked purchases of concrete mix, lumber, plastic sheeting, heavy-duty gloves, and a tarp, all made between April 2 and April 5. None of those items were found at his primary residence. But GPS data from his phone and financial records pointed to a different location, a rural property in Olympia. A place where Ziz had access through an acquaintance, but where he had no formal ties. When law enforcement arrived at the site, they immediately noticed something out of place. Tucked back near a tree line was a newly constructed shed. No visible tools. No gardening equipment. No padlock. It looked unfinished. The placement was odd. The concrete base was still curing. A patch of disturbed ground led up to the front. Investigators asked neighbors if they'd seen any activity. A few reported seeing a man working at the site with wood and bags of materials. Others said they hadn't noticed anything at all. On April 9, the shed was searched with a warrant. Cadaver dogs were brought in. One of them gave an alert within seconds of entering the structure. Another confirmed it. The signal was strong, direct. Something was underneath. The decision was made to dismantle the floor. Piece by piece, planks were pulled up, exposing layers of insulation, plastic, and finally, a thin coat of freshly poured concrete. It didn't take long before a human foot was uncovered. Everything stopped. The body was wrapped in plastic and buried partially in dirt, partially encased in the concrete foundation of the shed. The remains were removed with care. The scene was secured. And a mobile forensic unit was brought in to process the entire structure from top to bottom. The body was transported to the Thurston County Coroner's Office. That same evening, an autopsy was performed. It confirmed what investigators feared. It was Marcia Norman. The report listed multiple injuries. Blunt force trauma to the head. Sharp force wounds to the chest and lower body. Penetrating injuries consistent with a pneumatic nail gun. Her hands bore defensive wounds, signs that she had fought back. Toxicology later showed no evidence of drugs in her system, indicating that whatever happened, she was likely conscious during the attack. Back at the property, forensic teams recovered several critical items. Nails matching the wounds. A nail gun. A hammer. Empty cement bags. Tools with traces of blood. DNA was collected. Fingerprints were lifted from the interior frame of the shed. Investigators found hand-drawn sketches in Ziz's handwriting, one appearing to depict the outline of a shed, with notations for measurements and a phrase that stood out: secure foundation, no gaps. To detectives, the sequence of events became chillingly clear. Marcia had likely been killed shortly after her April 1st dinner with Ziz. Her body was hidden temporarily, then transported to the Olympia site. There, he built a structure over her, as if trying to erase the evidence, as if sealing away the crime beneath layers of wood and cement. The planning. The materials. The methodical construction. All of it suggested premeditation. Meanwhile, Marcia's family had been living in anguish, holding on to hope that she might still be found alive. When detectives visited them the night of April 9th, they were told the news in person. Her granddaughter later described it as the worst moment of our lives. She said, "My grandmother didn't deserve this. She was kind to everyone, including him. She trusted him. And he took advantage of that trust in the most horrible way." Neighbors brought flowers. Volunteers who had helped in the search gathered for a vigil that weekend. Candles lined the sidewalk outside her home. For a community that once considered itself safe and quiet, the shock ran deep. As the public learned more about the discovery, so did the media. The story spread quickly, not just because of what happened, but because of the way it was concealed. A shed built over a body. Constructed piece by the same man who had once prayed with her. The investigation was no longer just about a disappearance. It was a homicide case. And the person at the center of it was now facing the most serious charge the state could bring. On April 9, 2025, hours after Marcia Norman's body was found buried beneath a newly constructed shed, investigators began preparing a murder charge against Jeffrey Ziz. Ziz was still in custody in Missoula, Montana. He had been picked up days earlier for violating his probation. At the time of his arrest, he had refused to speak with detectives. He declined to answer questions about Marcia's disappearance. But now, the case had shifted. It was no longer about a missing person. It was about homicide. On April 10, the Thurston County Prosecuting Attorney's Office formally charged Jeffrey Allen Ziz with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and unlawful disposal of human remains. A warrant was issued for his extradition back to Washington. Court documents supporting the charges included receipts, surveillance images, witness statements, forensic evidence from the shed, and a disturbing handwritten letter found at his residence. The letter was 5 pages long, written in what prosecutors described as meticulous detail. It had no date, no recipient, and no name of the intended target. But the content was graphic and specific. Investigators say the letter described a plan to assault a woman, referred to only as a client. It referenced drugging her, binding her, sexually assaulting her, and ultimately killing her. One section of the letter read, "When she's quiet, I'll take her to the site. Should be enough time to finish the frame and pour." Another page contained a rough sketch of what appeared to be a small wooden structure. Annotations included measurements for joists, a note to seal edges, and one line that read, "Once she's under, there's no going back." While the letter didn't mention Marcia by name, investigators found alarming parallels between the document and the events that unfolded: the disappearance, the use of construction materials, the timing, the hidden burial. Prosecutors believed the letter was not just a fantasy, it was a blueprint. Detectives also learned more about Ziz's past during this phase of the investigation. In 2021, he had been charged with multiple counts of child rape and incest, serious allegations that shook the community he once claimed to serve. Ziz had been affiliated with Calvary Chapel of North Thurston, a church where he once gave sermons and presented himself as a man of faith. But those charges ended his ministry. Though he pled guilty to a reduced charge of child molestation in the 3rd degree, he was placed under strict probation and ordered to remain within state lines. Despite this conviction, he continued offering services as a handyman and operated under the appearance of being trustworthy, even faith-based. He had worked for Marcia Norman on and off for years. Her family believes that trust is what gave him access. At the time of her murder, Ziz was still on probation. By traveling to Montana, he violated the terms of his release, which is how police were able to hold him while Washington filed formal charges. Through interviews, forensic timelines, and digital tracking, investigators believe the following sequence of events took place. April 1, 2025. Marcia Norman invites Ziz to her home for dinner. This is the last time she is seen alive. Text messages and calls stop that night. April 2nd to 3rd. Ziz is seen purchasing concrete, lumber, nails, tarps, and other building materials. He uses local hardware stores and pays with traceable debit cards. April 3rd to 4th. Detectives believe Marcia's body is being transported to the property in Olympia. Neighbors report seeing a man working at the site with wood and tools. April 4th to 5th. The shed is completed. Evidence shows the base was poured in sections. A new structure appears on satellite imagery by April 5th. April 6th to 7th. Ziz leaves Washington and drives to Missoula, Montana, violating his probation. He is arrested on April 8th for the violation. April 9th. Marcia Norman's body is discovered. The Thurston County Sheriff's Office believes the murder was premeditated. They point to the materials, the letter, and the deliberate construction of the shed as evidence. Sheriff Derek Sanders spoke to local press after the charges were filed. He called it one of the most disturbing and calculated cases his department has ever handled. He said, "This wasn't impulsive. This was deliberate. This was planned. And it took advantage of someone who trusted him, someone vulnerable, kind, and alone." At his first court appearance in Washington, Ziz showed little emotion. He was ordered held without bail. The judge called him a flight risk and a danger to the community. As the legal process began to unfold, Marcia's family released a public statement. They thanked the community for their support, the volunteers who helped search, and the investigators who never gave up. They wrote, "We are heartbroken. But we are also grateful that our grandmother was found, and that the man responsible will face justice." The discovery of Marcia Norman's body sent shockwaves through the Tenino and Olympia communities. An 82-year-old woman, known for her warmth and kindness, found buried beneath a shed constructed by someone she trusted, her handyman, Jeffrey Ziz. As news of the gruesome details emerged, residents grappled with a mix of grief, anger, and disbelief. The notion that such a heinous act could occur in their midst was both unsettling and deeply personal. Community members organized vigils and memorials to honor Marcia's memory. Candles were lit, flowers laid, and stories shared, all painting a picture of a woman who was not just a neighbor, but a cherished friend and confidant. Local churches and community centers opened their doors for counseling sessions, providing spaces for residents to process the tragedy and support one another. Marcia's family released a heartfelt statement, expressing their profound loss and gratitude for the community's support. They described her as the center of their family, a woman whose presence brought unity and joy. They also extended their thanks to law enforcement for their relentless pursuit of justice, acknowledging the tireless efforts that led to the discovery of Marcia's remains and the apprehension of the suspect. Jeffrey Ziz, previously convicted of child molestation, was formally charged with first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and unlawful disposal of human remains. He remains in custody without bail, facing a potential life sentence if convicted. The Thurston County Prosecutor's Office is preparing for a trial that promises to be both complex and emotionally charged. The prosecution is expected to present a case built on forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and the disturbing letter allegedly penned by Ziz outlining a plan eerily similar to Marcia's murder. Defense attorneys have yet to disclose their strategy, but the community watches closely, hoping for a trial that brings clarity and justice. As the legal process unfolds, the community remains steadfast in their support for Marcia's family. The tragedy has galvanized residents, prompting discussions on safety, trust, and the importance of vigilance. Marcia Norman's legacy endures, not just in the memories of those who knew her, but in the collective resolve of a community determined to seek justice and ensure such a tragedy never happens again. In the wake of Marcia Norman's tragic death, the Thurston County community grappled with grief and a quest for justice. The legal proceedings against Jeffrey Ziz, her former handyman, became a focal point for both the media and the public. Jeffrey Ziz, 47, faced charges of first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and unlawful disposal of human remains. These charges stemmed from the discovery of Marcia Norman's body, partially encased in concrete beneath a shed in Olympia, a structure Ziz had constructed shortly after her disappearance. Ziz had a prior conviction for child molestation in 2021, for which he was sentenced to 104 months in prison. However, due to Washington state laws, his sentence was reduced by 93 months, leading to his early release. This fact raised concerns and discussions about sentencing laws and public safety. Following his arrest in Missoula, Montana, for violating the terms of his release, Ziz was extradited back to Washington. He remains in custody without bail as the legal process unfolds. The community's response to Marcia Norman's death was one of collective mourning and reflection. Vigils were held, and residents came together to honor her memory. The case also sparked conversations about the criminal justice system, rehabilitation, and the protection of vulnerable individuals. Local officials and residents expressed their sorrow and support for the Norman family. The tragedy served as a somber reminder of the importance of community vigilance and the need for systemic reforms. Months after the initial arrest of Jeffrey Ziz, the courtroom became the stage for a trial that captured the attention of Washington state, and far beyond. The murder of Marcia Norman, an elderly woman who had simply trusted the wrong person, left a community searching for closure. In the packed Thurston County courtroom, the Norman family sat quietly, flanked by friends and supporters. On the other side sat Jeffrey Ziz, shackled and silent, facing the gravity of the charges against him. The prosecution built their case meticulously, presenting overwhelming forensic evidence that tied Ziz directly to the murder and attempted concealment. Concrete samples taken from the shed were matched chemically with bags found in Ziz's possession. DNA evidence, including blood on tools recovered at the scene, was submitted for analysis. Most damning was the discovery of a handwritten document in Ziz's handwriting, described by prosecutors as a blueprint for murder. It laid out a plan that included isolating a victim, torturing them for days, and then burying the body under a structure. Prosecutors argued that the document was not fantasy, it was a manifesto, and Marcia Norman had been its victim. The defense struggled to counter the weight of the evidence. They questioned the timeline, argued that the document was a fictional piece of writing, and raised concerns about the legality of the search. But the jury appeared unmoved. After nearly 3 weeks of emotional testimony, forensic analysis, and expert witnesses, the trial came to a close. The jury deliberated for less than a full day. When they returned, the courtroom went still. The foreperson read aloud the verdict: guilty on all counts, first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and unlawful disposal of human remains. Ziz showed no emotion as the verdict was read. But behind him, Marcia's family wept, a mixture of relief and enduring grief. Judge Carol Murphy, known for her measured tone and firm sentencing in high-profile cases, addressed Ziz directly. "You took a vulnerable woman's life in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. This court finds no justification, no mitigating factors. The maximum sentence is not only warranted, it is necessary." Ziz was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case drew national headlines. Beyond the horror of Marcia Norman's death, people across the country were outraged to learn that Ziz had recently been released early from a prior child molestation sentence. Editorials criticized the sentencing structure that allowed a violent offender to be released early. Petitions began circulating, calling for legislative changes in Washington state. Governor Jay Inslee's office even released a statement saying that sentencing guidelines and parole eligibility would be re-examined in light of the public's concern. For many in Tenino and Olympia, the trial's conclusion marked the end of a harrowing chapter, but it also raised deeper questions about accountability, safety, and whether the justice system had done enough to prevent this from happening in the first place. Marcia Norman's life ended in tragedy, but her story would not fade quietly. Her legacy now includes a broader push for reforms and a community's renewed commitment to protecting its most vulnerable members. For her family, the verdict brought some sense of peace. But as they've said in interviews since, justice is just one part of the healing. We still live every day without her. The tragic death of Marcia Norman not only shook the Thurston County community but also ignited a broader conversation about sentencing laws, public safety, and the justice system's role in protecting vulnerable individuals. In the aftermath of the case, attention turned to Washington state sentencing guidelines. Critics highlighted that Jeffries is, previously convicted of child molestation, had his sentence significantly reduced due to existing laws, leading to his early release. This revelation spurred discussions among lawmakers and the public about the need for reform. The Washington State Sentencing Guidelines Commission reviewed the circumstances surrounding Z's release. While comprehensive reforms were still under deliberation, the case underscored the urgency of evaluating sentencing structures to prevent similar tragedies. The community's response was one of unity and resilience. Vigils were held in Marcia's memory, with residents gathering to honor her life and advocate for change. Local organizations initiated support groups for the elderly, emphasizing the importance of community vigilance and support. Marcia's family, while grieving, became vocal advocates for policy change, sharing their story to highlight the consequences of systemic shortcomings and the need for protective measures for vulnerable populations. Marcia Norman's legacy extends beyond the tragedy of her death. It serves as a catalyst for introspection and change, prompting communities and lawmakers to reevaluate systems meant to protect citizens. Her story is a poignant reminder of the impact one life can have in driving societal progress. Marcia Norman was 82 years old. She was a grandmother, a neighbor, a friend, someone who had lived a full life and deserved peace and safety in her final years. But instead, her life was taken in a way that shocked not just those who knew her, but the entire state of Washington. Her case is more than just a headline. It is a story about trust, about vulnerability, and about the gaps in our system that allow predators to walk free before they should. It's also about the strength of a family that refused to stop searching, and a community that came together to say, never again. The early release of Jeffries is due to sentence credit policies highlights a critical issue. Many viewers may not be aware of how sentence reductions can work in practice. This case has sparked important conversations about sentencing transparency and victim safety. Crimes against the elderly are rising, and this case shows how easily a trusted person, even a handyman, can gain access to someone's life. It's a reminder for families to stay closely connected and for communities to stay vigilant. From the moment Marcia was reported missing, neighbors and loved ones rallied together. Her story inspired action, awareness, and local efforts to better protect seniors and advocate for legislative changes. Marcia Norman didn't get the peaceful twilight years she deserved. But her story has lit a fire, in courtrooms, in living rooms, and across communities. We owe it to her, and to others like her, to keep asking hard questions and pushing for better protections. Marcia's life mattered. And by remembering her, by saying her name, and by learning from what happened, we help ensure her story makes a difference. Justice is not just a verdict. It's what we do after. Story 3. In the fall of 2019, multiple law enforcement agencies across state lines found themselves drawn into an investigation that began with a routine welfare check. The people at the center of it were Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, a mother of 3 from Arizona and a religious author from Idaho. What started with a few questions turned into one of the most widely followed criminal cases in recent memory. Lori Vallow was known by friends and neighbors as bright, cheerful, and deeply spiritual. She attended church regularly, spoke openly about her faith, and raised her children in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. Chad Daybell lived over 900 miles away in the small city of Rexburg, Idaho. He was a father of 5, a former cemetery worker, and a self-published author of religious-themed fiction. He wrote extensively about near-death experiences and claimed to have spiritual visions. In 2018, Chad and Lori met for the first time at a religious conference. They connected immediately over shared beliefs, beliefs that would soon begin to shift dramatically away from mainstream doctrine. Over the next year, Lori's life began to change. She withdrew from her extended family. There were changes in her relationships. There were questions that went unanswered. And soon, there were people close to her who could no longer be reached. When police arrived at Lori's new home in Rexburg, they weren't expecting anything unusual. They were there to perform a simple welfare check. But what they encountered led to a series of search warrants, multi-state investigations, and months of national headlines. As investigators tried to get answers, a series of events unfolded that spanned multiple states, raised serious questions about what Lori and Chad believed, and what those beliefs may have led them to do. Lori Noreen Cox was born on June 26, 1973, in San Bernardino, California. She was the fourth of 5 children, raised in a family that valued religion and family life. Lori was known to be charismatic, confident, and well-liked. She graduated from Eisenhower High School in Rialto, California, and later participated in beauty pageants. In 2004, she even appeared as a contestant on the reality TV show Wheel of Fortune. At the time, she spoke about her role as a full-time mother and her belief that faith played a central part in her life. By her early 30s, Lori had been married several times and was raising 3 children, her son Colby Ryan, daughter Tylee Ryan, and later, her adopted son Joshua Jackson Vallow, known as JJ. JJ was adopted by Lori and her then-husband Charles Vallow in 2013. JJ had autism, and those who knew the family said Lori was deeply involved in his care. Charles Vallow was Lori's 4th husband. A former college baseball player who had converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Charles worked in financial services and was seen by friends as a stabilizing force in Lori's life. The family lived in Chandler, Arizona, where neighbors described them as friendly and active in their local community. In 2018, Lori began expressing more intense religious beliefs. She became drawn to online groups and podcasts focused on near-death experiences, prophecy, and preparing for the end times. Through these circles, she was introduced to the writings of Chad Daybell. Chad Guy Daybell was born on August 11, 1968, in Provo, Utah. He graduated from Brigham Young University with a degree in journalism and worked as an editor for a small publishing company before founding his own imprint, Spring Creek Book Company. Over the years, Chad wrote and self-published more than 24 books. Most were religious novels that included themes of spiritual warfare, the afterlife, and apocalyptic scenarios. In some circles, he was regarded as a humble man of strong faith with an interest in prophecy. In others, his writings were seen as fringe. Chad married Tammy Douglas in 1990. Together, they raised 5 children in eastern Idaho. Tammy was a school librarian, and Chad worked various jobs, including cemetery maintenance and freelance writing. They lived in Salem, a small town near Rexburg. Chad claimed he had a near-death experience in his 20s that gave him the ability to receive visions and communicate with the spirit world. He later said he had been chosen to help lead the righteous through what he believed would be a period of great destruction, an apocalyptic cleansing of the earth. In 2018, Lori and Chad met in person for the first time at a Preparing a People event in St. George, Utah, a conference series focused on Latter-day Saint-based spiritual preparedness. Chad was a featured speaker. Lori was in the audience. They connected immediately. Over time, their communication increased. They began speaking frequently, often daily. By early 2019, Lori's family and friends noticed changes in her beliefs and behavior. She started talking about alternate dimensions, people being possessed, and the idea of a light and dark rating for individuals, concepts that closely mirrored Chad's teachings. By early 2019, the relationship between Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell was no longer limited to books, podcasts, or conference appearances. It had become something much more personal, and much more intense. The two shared an increasing fixation on what they described as the coming end of the world. Chad spoke of a looming apocalypse he believed would begin within a matter of years. He outlined visions of natural disasters, foreign invasions, and the cleansing of wicked souls from the earth. Laurie, by then fully engaged in his teachings, believed she had been chosen for a divine role in that future. They spoke of multiple lives on earth, a belief that individuals were sometimes reincarnated repeatedly throughout history. He also claimed that Laurie had threatened to kill him. Body camera footage from responding officers shows Charles expressing frustration, concern, and fear. He said Laurie had vanished with their son, JJ, and that he didn't know where they were. The situation was confusing to officers at the time, and no criminal charges were filed. Within weeks, Charles filed for divorce. But as Laurie returned home, the situation didn't stabilize. In fact, it escalated. By July, Charles was still actively parenting JJ and trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. He arranged to pick up JJ from Laurie's home on the morning of July 11, 2019. Alex Cox, Laurie's brother, was also at the house that morning. At some point during that visit, a confrontation occurred. According to Alex, Charles became aggressive and struck him with a baseball bat. In response, Alex claimed he retrieved a handgun and shot Charles twice in the chest. Laurie was not present when police arrived, but she returned to the scene not long after. Footage from that day shows her standing calmly outside, chatting casually with officers, and even smiling. Police noted her demeanor, but again, no charges were filed. The shooting was deemed self-defense based on Alex's account. Charles Vallow's death marked the first major turning point in the investigation. But at the time, it didn't spark a deeper inquiry. The case was closed. Alex was not arrested. Laurie moved on. In September of that year, Laurie left Arizona and relocated to Rexburg, Idaho. She brought Tylee, who was 16, and JJ, who was 7. Tylee had just started her junior year of high school. JJ, who was diagnosed with autism, had recently transferred to a local elementary school. Rexburg was quiet, rural, and close to where Chad Daybell lived. Laurie and Chad had grown closer in recent months, connected by shared religious views and ongoing communication. Friends later said they were speaking multiple times per day. On September 8, 2019, Laurie, Alex, JJ, and Tylee visited Yellowstone National Park. Photos from that trip, later recovered from Laurie's iCloud, would become significant. That day marked the last time Tylee Ryan was seen alive by anyone outside the family. A few days later, Alex Cox moved into a nearby apartment in the same complex as Laurie. He was often seen coming and going from her unit. JJ was last seen at school on September 23. Laurie unenrolled him the following day, claiming she would homeschool him from that point forward. After that, neither child was seen in public again. Laurie's story about where the children were changed multiple times. She told some people that Tylee was attending classes at Brigham Young University. She told others that JJ was with family friends in Arizona. When those friends were contacted by police, they said they hadn't seen him in weeks. In late November, police in Rexburg were asked to perform a welfare check on JJ, after his grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, grew worried. When officers arrived, Laurie told them JJ was staying with a friend in Arizona. Chad Daybell was also present at the home, though he initially told police he didn't know Laurie very well. That was a lie. When police returned the following day with a search warrant, both Laurie and Chad were gone. They had packed up and left town overnight. Investigators began working quickly to track their movements. Meanwhile, family members were growing more and more vocal. JJ's grandparents held press conferences. Tylee's older brother, Colby Ryan, pleaded publicly for answers. Social media began to light up with speculation. As public scrutiny increased, investigators started to re-examine the people connected to Laurie and Chad, and the pattern that had started to emerge. Less than a month after the children were last seen, another death occurred. Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy, died suddenly at the couple's home in Salem, Idaho. Chad told police she had gone to bed coughing and never woke up. Tammy was 49 years old and reportedly in good health. She had not been diagnosed with any serious conditions. The local coroner listed the cause of death as natural and allowed for her body to be buried without an autopsy. 10 days later, Chad flew to Hawaii. Lori was already there. On November 5, 2019, just 2 weeks after Tammy's death, Chad and Lori were married on a beach in Kauai. They wore white. They appeared carefree. And there was no mention of JJ or Tylee. Photos of the wedding later circulated online, drawing outrage and disbelief. Back in Idaho, law enforcement began taking a closer look at the sudden death of Tammy Daybell. They ordered her body to be exhumed and conducted a full autopsy. They also began issuing search warrants for homes, storage units, cell phones, and digital accounts. By early December, the case had become national news. Where were the children? What did Chad and Lori believe had happened? And how many people around them had died in such a short period of time? In just 5 months, 3 people were dead: Charles Vallow, shot by Alex Cox; Tammy Daybell, found unresponsive in her home; and Alex himself, who died suddenly in December 2019, just days after investigators searched his apartment. His cause of death was later determined to be a pulmonary embolism. And 2 children, Tylee and JJ, were missing. The urgency grew. So did the pressure. But Lori and Chad remained silent. Authorities made it clear, they were not being charged with murder. Not yet. They were being asked a simple question: where are the children? As 2019 drew to a close, the search for Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow intensified. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states collaborated, piecing together the movements of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. The couple had vanished from Idaho, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and growing suspicion. In January 2020, authorities located Lori and Chad in Kauai, Hawaii. They were served with a court order compelling Lori to produce her children within 5 days. The deadline came and went without any sign of Tylee or JJ. The couple's refusal to comply only deepened the mystery. Investigators began to scrutinize their digital footprints, uncovering a web of communications that hinted at a disturbing belief system. Messages between Lori, Chad, and Lori's brother, Alex Cox, revealed discussions about individuals being possessed by dark spirits, a concept they used to justify their actions. On February 20, 2020, Lori was arrested in Hawaii on charges of desertion and non-support of dependent children. She was extradited to Idaho, where she faced additional charges. Chad remained free, but under close surveillance. The case captured national attention. Media outlets dubbed Lori the Doomsday Mom, highlighting the couple's apocalyptic beliefs and the mysterious disappearances. Public interest surged, with daily coverage and in-depth analyses of the unfolding events. In June 2020, a significant breakthrough occurred. Investigators executed a search warrant on Chad Daybell's property in Rexburg, Idaho. They discovered human remains buried in the backyard. The remains were later identified as those of JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan. Chad was arrested on charges of destruction or concealment of evidence. The discovery of the children's remains marked a turning point in the investigation, shifting the focus from a missing persons case to a homicide inquiry. As the legal proceedings advanced, more details emerged about the couple's beliefs and actions. Prosecutors alleged that Lori and Chad viewed certain individuals, including Lori's children and Chad's wife, Tammy Daybell, as obstacles to their prophesied mission. In May 2021, Lori and Chad were indicted on charges of first-degree murder for the deaths of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy. The indictments painted a grim picture of a couple driven by radical beliefs, willing to eliminate anyone they perceived as a hindrance. The trials that followed were closely watched. In April 2023, Lori was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Chad's trial concluded in June 2024, resulting in a death sentence. The case left an indelible mark on the public consciousness, serving as a stark reminder of how extreme beliefs can lead to devastating consequences. By mid-2020, the mystery surrounding Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell was no longer confined to court documents or small-town rumors. It was now the subject of documentaries, podcasts, network specials, and daily coverage from national outlets. As more details emerged, the scope of the case widened, from missing children to multiple suspicious deaths, and now, murder indictments. The first major legal milestone came in May 2021, when a grand jury in Idaho indicted both Lori and Chad on first-degree murder charges for the deaths of Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow. They were also charged in the death of Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife of nearly 30 years. The charges also included conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and grand theft, the latter related to the Social Security benefits Lori continued to collect in her children's names after their deaths. In a legal twist, Lori Vallow was declared mentally unfit to stand trial shortly after her indictment. She was committed to a psychiatric facility for treatment and evaluation, and would not return to court for nearly a year. Chad's trial was put on hold, pending Lori's restoration to competency. In April 2022, doctors deemed Lori mentally fit. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty for both her and Chad. However, a judge later ruled that Lori would face life in prison without parole if convicted, after the death penalty was taken off the table in her case due to procedural concerns. Lori Vallow's trial began on April 3, 2023, in Ada County, Idaho, after being moved from Rexburg due to pretrial publicity. Cameras were banned from the courtroom. Inside, jurors listened as prosecutors laid out their case, a story of religious fanaticism, greed, and manipulation. They argued that Lori and Chad believed in a religious system that divided people into categories, light or dark. Individuals labeled as dark were thought to be possessed or spiritually compromised, and, in their view, could be removed from the earthly plane. Lori's children, they said, were deemed dark spirits, which, to Lori and Chad, justified their deaths. The prosecution presented cell phone location data, search history, iCloud files, and text messages. They showed how Alex Cox, Lori's brother, was present on Chad's property the exact morning JJ and Tylee are believed to have been buried. They showed texts between Chad and Lori in which they discussed clearing dark spirits and being exalted in the afterlife. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Colby Ryan, Lori's eldest son. He looked directly at his mother and asked, "Why didn't you protect us?" He testified about the abrupt disappearance of his siblings and Lori's bizarre explanations, including claims that JJ was safe and happy. Lori did not testify in her own defense. Her attorneys argued that she had been misled and manipulated by Chad Daybell, that she believed what he told her, and that she was not the one who physically committed the murders. This time, she represented herself in court, often clashing with prosecutors and at one point suggesting that Charles was killed in self-defense, despite overwhelming evidence that she and Alex had planned it. The jury took only a few hours to convict her again. She received another life sentence, to be served consecutively with her previous one. By the end of 2025, both Lori and Chad were fully sentenced. Lori will spend the rest of her life behind bars. Chad awaits execution on Idaho's death row. This case, with its tragic losses, bizarre religious doctrine, and high-profile courtroom drama, stands as one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern American history. It forced communities, and courts, to grapple with the consequences of belief systems taken to deadly extremes. As the trials of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell unfolded, the case captivated the nation. Media outlets dubbed Lori the Doomsday Mom, highlighting the couple's apocalyptic beliefs and the mysterious deaths surrounding them. Documentaries, podcasts, and news specials dissected every development, fueling public fascination and horror. The extensive coverage prompted discussions about the influence of fringe religious beliefs and the potential dangers they pose when taken to extremes. Experts analyzed how Lori and Chad's ideology, which included labeling individuals as zombies and believing in impending doomsday scenarios, contributed to their justification of heinous acts. Public reaction was intense. Communities expressed shock and outrage, particularly in Idaho and Arizona, where the crimes occurred. Vigils were held for the victims, and support poured in for the grieving families. The case sparked debates about mental health, religious extremism, and the responsibility of individuals to intervene when warning signs emerge. The legal proceedings also led to introspection within the criminal justice system. Authorities in Arizona and Idaho reviewed their protocols for handling high-profile cases, emphasizing the importance of mental competency evaluations and the management of media sensitivity in courtrooms. As the dust settled, the case left an indelible mark on society. It served as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked beliefs and the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable individuals. The tragic loss of Tylee, J.J., and Tammy serves as a somber reminder of the consequences that can arise when reality is overshadowed by delusion. The saga of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, marked by apocalyptic beliefs and a trail of tragic deaths, has left an indelible mark on the American psyche. As the legal proceedings concluded, the nation grappled with the broader implications of the case. Media coverage played a pivotal role in shaping public perception. The extensive reporting, while informative, also sparked debates about the balance between public interest and the right to a fair trial. The courtroom became a focal point for discussions on media ethics and the influence of sensationalism. Communities across the country, particularly in Arizona and Idaho, felt the ripple effects. The case prompted introspection about the signs of radicalization and the importance of community vigilance. Educational institutions and community organizations initiated programs to raise awareness about the dangers of extremist ideologies. The criminal justice system also faced scrutiny. The case highlighted the challenges of addressing mental health issues within legal proceedings and the complexities of prosecuting crimes intertwined with unconventional belief systems. Legal experts called for reforms to better navigate such cases in the future. Family members of the victims, while finding some solace in the verdicts, continue to advocate for change. They emphasize the need for early intervention and support systems to prevent similar tragedies. As society reflects on the events, the case serves as a stark reminder of the consequences when delusion overrides reality. It underscores the importance of critical thinking, community engagement, and the vigilance required to safeguard against the perils of radicalization. As the legal proceedings concluded, attention turned to understanding the psychological underpinnings of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell's actions. Experts and observers sought to unravel the complex interplay of beliefs, motivations, and personal dynamics that led to a series of tragic events. Lori Vallow, once described as a devoted mother, exhibited behaviors that raised questions about her mental state. Her unwavering belief in apocalyptic scenarios and the existence of zombies indicated a detachment from reality. Some psychologists suggest that her actions may align with traits of antisocial personality disorder, characterized by a disregard for others and a lack of empathy. Chad Daybell, a self-published author of doomsday fiction, presented himself as a spiritual leader with prophetic insights. His writings and teachings emphasize the imminent end of the world and the need to prepare for it. Prosecutors argued that his desire for power and control played a significant role in the events that unfolded. The relationship between Lori and Chad was marked by a shared belief system that reinforced their delusions. Their union seemed to amplify their convictions, creating an echo chamber that justified their actions. This dynamic, where mutual reinforcement of extreme beliefs leads to destructive behavior, is a phenomenon observed in certain cult-like relationships. Psychologists analyzing the case highlight the dangers of such insular belief systems, where external perspectives are dismissed, and dissent is viewed as a threat. In this environment, the line between belief and reality becomes blurred, leading to decisions that can have devastating consequences. Understanding the psychological profiles of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell offers insights into how deeply held beliefs, when unchecked, can lead to actions that defy societal norms and result in tragedy. It underscores the importance of mental health awareness and the need for interventions when warning signs emerge. The harrowing saga of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell has left an indelible mark on society, prompting introspection and discussions that extend beyond the courtroom. At the forefront is the intersection of mental health and the criminal justice system. Lori Vallow's case highlighted the complexities of assessing mental competency, as she was initially deemed unfit to stand trial due to her fragile mental state. This raised questions about the adequacy of mental health evaluations and the resources available for individuals exhibiting signs of psychological distress. Religious extremism also emerged as a critical concern. The couple's apocalyptic beliefs, which included labeling individuals as zombies and justifying killings as a means to eradicate evil, underscored the potential dangers of radical ideologies. This case served as a stark reminder of how distorted belief systems can lead to devastating consequences. The role of community vigilance cannot be overstated. Friends and family members observed changes in Lori's behavior, including her obsession with doomsday scenarios and detachment from reality. However, the lack of timely intervention highlighted the need for communities to be more proactive in addressing warning signs and seeking help for those in crisis. Media coverage of the case, while bringing attention to the victims and the complexities involved, also sparked debates about sensationalism and the ethical responsibilities of journalism. The extensive reporting prompted discussions about how to balance public interest with respectful storytelling. In response to the case, various organizations and institutions have initiated programs aimed at raising awareness about mental health, the dangers of extremist beliefs, and the importance of community support systems. These efforts aim to prevent similar tragedies by fostering environments where individuals feel empowered to seek help and intervene when necessary. As society reflects on the events surrounding Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, the case serves as a somber reminder of the consequences that can arise when mental health issues, radical beliefs, and a lack of community intervention converge. It underscores the imperative for vigilance, compassion, and proactive engagement to safeguard individuals and communities from similar fates. As the legal chapters closed on the harrowing saga of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, the reverberations of their actions continue to be felt deeply by the victims' families, the legal system, and communities across the nation. For the families, the pain of loss remains an enduring reality. Colby Ryan, Lori's surviving son, has publicly grappled with the betrayal and grief of losing his siblings, Tylee and JJ, at the hands of his own mother. Kay and Larry Woodcock, JJ's grandparents, have become vocal advocates for child protection, channeling their sorrow into efforts to raise awareness and prevent similar tragedies. The legal system, too, has faced introspection. The case highlighted the complexities of dealing with defendants who exhibit extreme religious beliefs intertwined with mental health issues. Lori's initial declaration of mental incompetence to stand trial prompted discussions about the adequacy of mental health evaluations and the resources available for individuals exhibiting signs of psychological distress. Communities have been prompted to reflect on the importance of vigilance and intervention. The couple's apocalyptic beliefs, which included labeling individuals as zombies and justifying killings as a means to eradicate evil, underscored the potential dangers of radical ideologies. This case served as a stark reminder of how distorted belief systems can lead to devastating consequences. Media coverage of the case, while bringing attention to the victims and the complexities involved, also sparked debates about sensationalism and the ethical responsibilities of journalism. The extensive reporting prompted discussions about how to balance public interest with respectful storytelling. In response to the case, various organizations and institutions have initiated programs aimed at raising awareness about mental health, the dangers of extremist beliefs, and the importance of community support systems. These efforts aim to prevent similar tragedies by fostering environments where individuals feel empowered to seek help and intervene when necessary. As society reflects on the events surrounding Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, the case serves as a somber reminder of the consequences that can arise when mental health issues, radical beliefs, and a lack of community intervention converge. It underscores the imperative for vigilance, compassion, and proactive engagement to safeguard individuals and communities from similar fates. Robert and Emily Hayes first crossed paths in the summer of 2014 during orientation at the University of California, Davis School of Law. Robert, fresh from a stellar career as a collegiate linebacker, had traded his jersey for casebooks. Emily, at ease in lecture halls and elementary school classrooms alike, envisioned a future shaping young minds. Their connection was instant, a shared sense of purpose that blossomed over late-night study sessions and coffee-fueled debates on justice and education. Friends recall their engagement 6 months later, announced with joyous tears in a campus courtyard. Emily wore a simple pearl ring, Robert couldn't stop smiling. They married the following spring, surrounded by classmates and professors who lauded their dedication to each other and to their respective callings. In the early years, their lives balanced court filings and classroom lesson plans seamlessly. Neighbors described the couple as attentive and inviting. Weekend barbecues on their manicured lawn, neighborhood book clubs in their living room, and holiday gatherings that overflowed with laughter. Emily's students often arrived at the Hayes home for tutoring sessions. Robert's colleagues occasionally stopped by to discuss case strategy over Emily's famous apple pie. The home's walls bore family photos, Emily's bright grin at her classroom desk, Robert in his law school cap, and later, snapshots of the two on beach vacations. Yet behind the facade of suburban harmony, subtle tensions began to emerge. Late-night phone calls held behind closed doors, hurried text messages whose content none could decipher. Emily confided in a close friend that Robert's drive sometimes felt overwhelming, that his long hours at the firm and constant need to excel left her feeling isolated. Robert, meanwhile, voiced to his father pride in his young wife's accomplishments but frustration when their visions for the future diverged. These undercurrents never spilled into public view, until that night in April. The marriage that once symbolized unity now stood under the harsh glare of suspicion. Every photograph, every happy memory, would be re-examined under the lens of tragedy. As we move toward the events that fractured this family, it becomes clear, in the line between love and conflict, the boundary can be heartbreakingly thin. The evening of April 12, 2024, began like any other for the Hayes family. Emily returned home from teaching, her tote bag still dusted with chalk, and Robert logged off work early, intent on preparing dinner. Neighbors later reported seeing soft lamplight glow through their living room windows, the warm hue suggesting quiet domesticity. At approximately 10:15 p.m., a 911 call shattered the calm. The dispatcher's log, public record and time-stamped, captures a female voice, breathless and pleading, "Please, help, someone's been shot." Story 4. The courtroom fell into an uneasy hush the moment the bailiff's gavel struck the bench. Cameras, once clicking rapidly, stuttered to silence. All eyes turned to the figure stepping forward, Father. Judge Michael Hayes had presided over hundreds of hearings, yet today he did not wear his judicial robes. Instead, he stood in plain clothes, his expression unreadable. In the front row sat Robert Hayes, his hands cuffed before him, eyes cast downward. Moments ago, the jury had delivered its verdict, guilty of taking the life of the woman he vowed to protect. A collective intake of breath swept the room as the judge crossed the aisle. Time seemed to slow. Each footfall echoed against marble floors. Then, without a word, Michael Hayes reached out and pulled his son into an embrace. It was a gesture that defied everything the room represented: justice, order, impartiality. For 12 seconds, a father's grief and pride intertwined, locking the courtroom in a tension no one could break. The clerk's pen hovered above the record, the bailiff's hand rested on his sidearm. Cameras whirred back to life, but no photograph could capture the weight of that moment, the collision of duty and devotion. As Michael Hayes released his son and returned to the bench, the hush deepened, leaving behind a question that would haunt headlines and legal debates for months to come: when the scales of justice weigh family against the law, which will carry more weight? Judge Michael Hayes has served on Sacramento County Superior Court for 23 years, earning a reputation for fairness and discipline. At 58, he'd overseen countless cases, from minor disputes to high-profile felonies. His commitment to the law was his compass, guiding him through every verdict and sentence. His son, Robert Hayes, was 32 at the time of the incident. A former college athlete and associate attorney at a mid-sized firm, Robert was known among friends as earnest and protective, especially toward his wife, Emily. Emily Hayes, 30, was a schoolteacher adored by students and colleagues alike for her warmth and dedication. Together, they seemed the picture of stability. But on the night of April 12, 2024, that image shattered. In their suburban home just outside Sacramento, a single gunshot ended Emily's life and forever altered the Hayes family. Prosecutors charged Robert with second-degree murder, arguing that moment reflected something far more than a tragic accident. The trial began on December 2, 2024. In the courtroom, where Judge Hayes typically maintained strict boundaries, his role suddenly carried a heavier burden. Could impartial justice exist when the accused was his own son? And for Robert, the man who once defended his wife's dreams, the stakes had never been higher. The line went silent, then crackled with the sound of footsteps and a single, definitive gunshot. Responding officers arrived within 6 minutes to find Emily Hayes on the hardwood floor of her home office, blood pooling beneath her. Robert stood in the doorway, handgun in hand, his shirt stained just above his heart. Officers immediately secured the weapon, a 9mm semi-automatic, and called for medical assistance. Paramedics worked frantically, but Emily succumbed to her injury en route to Mercy General Hospital. The coroner's report later confirmed a single-entry wound to the chest, consistent with close-range fire. Gunpowder residue on Robert's hands indicated he had discharged the weapon, though his clothing showed no sign of defensive wounds or struggle. Investigators scoured the scene for context, overturned chairs, a shattered family photo frame, and, crucially, a desktop computer open to an email draft from Emily. That draft, addressed to a colleague, lamented escalating tensions at home and hinted at a decision she was still working up the courage to make. Text messages between the couple from earlier that night revealed Emily questioning Robert's long hours and hinting at meeting a friend after work. Robert's last text in that string, "I just want things back to normal." As detectives pieced together the sequence, two competing narratives emerged. Robert insisted to officers that the firearm discharged accidentally during a moment of panic when Emily lunged toward him in distress. Prosecutors, however, viewed the arrangement of physical evidence, Emily's body position, the location of the weapon, and the timing of text messages, as indicating deliberation. Was it a tragic accident, as Robert claimed, or the culmination of a relationship stretched beyond its limits? In the pre-dawn hours, Robert was arrested and booked on suspicion of second-degree murder. The community awoke to headlines that morning, their shock mirrored by Emily's students, who learned of their teacher's death through tearful announcements at school. By day's end, what had begun as a routine night at home had transformed into a fatal turning point, one that would drive a judge, a father, and a family into an agonizing cross-examination of truth and motive. In the hours following the arrest, Sacramento County Sheriff's detectives began constructing a detailed timeline. Body-worn camera footage from the first responding officer captured Robert Hayes in a state of shock. His voice trembled as he recounted, "I never meant for any of this to happen." He consented to a preliminary interview, during which he reiterated his belief that the gun had gone off accidentally when Emily reached for him. Meanwhile, crime scene investigators photographed every angle of the Hayes residence. Their images documented splintered wood beneath Emily's body, likely from the heavy oak desk she'd collapsed against, and the trajectory markings on the carpet where the bullet had exited. Specialists from the California Department of Justice seized the handgun and sent it to the state forensic lab for ballistic testing. Fingerprint analysis confirmed Robert's prints on both the grip and the slide, consistent with him having recently chambered a round. Detectives also combed through digital evidence. Emily's phone revealed a flurry of 30 text messages exchanged with Robert in the 6 hours before the shooting, few of which were preserved in court exhibits. Of particular note was a message Emily sent at 9:48 p.m., "We need to talk. I can't keep pretending everything's fine." Just 5 minutes later, Robert texted back, "Not tonight, please." Metadata from the home's security camera system captured images of Emily entering the study at 10:10 p.m., followed by Robert a minute later, the door clicking shut behind him. Forensic psychologists were brought in to assess the couple's dynamic. Their preliminary reports, later leaked to the press, suggested a pattern of controlling behavior by Robert, though colleagues and friends disputed this, describing him as caring and supportive. Genetic tests ruled out any congenital conditions that might have caused an involuntary discharge of the weapon, and toxicology reports found no substances in Robert's system that would impair coordination or judgment. By midday, the district attorney's office had reviewed the assembled evidence and formally charged Robert with second-degree murder. Bail was set at $1 million, a figure his defense team immediately sought to reduce, arguing that his local ties and lack of prior offenses made him neither a flight risk nor a danger to the community. Judge Hayes, recusing himself from any bail hearings, appointed a substitute judge to oversee pre-trial matters. Yet whispers of his potential influence persisted, coloring every decision that followed. As Robert was escorted to his holding cell, the courtroom corridors emptied, leaving behind a scattering of forensic markers and a single question scrawled across the notes of every detective in the building: how had a loving marriage led so quickly to tragedy, and would the evidence uncovered in these frantic hours be enough to secure a conviction? In the weeks before the trial's December 2nd opening, the Hayes case took on a life of its own. Media outlets from local television stations to national legal blogs descended on the courthouse, staking out in the cold morning air for a glimpse of Robert or his father. Reporters hustled outside courtrooms, notebooks at the ready, eager for any hint of a comment, though both Hayes men largely maintained their silence. The defense team, led by veteran attorney Mark Allen, filed a motion to lower bail, arguing compassionately that Robert's ties to the community, his decades-long residency, professional reputation, and family connections, mitigated any flight risk. Family friends testified to his character, painting him as a devoted husband and son. In contrast, Deputy District Attorney Karen Liu pushed back, citing the gravity of the offense and the potential for intimidation of witnesses. The substitute judge ultimately halved bail to $500,000, allowing Robert to post bond under strict conditions, electronic monitoring and no contact with any potential prosecution witnesses. Behind closed doors, Allen and Liu sparred over evidentiary disputes. Allen's team sought to exclude Emily's unsent email draft, arguing it was hearsay and prejudicial, while prosecutors countered that it went to motive, demonstrating Emily's expressed fear of escalating tensions. Judge Sharon Patel, brought in to replace Michael Hayes for all trial-related matters, ruled that the email could be admitted, though redacted to remove speculative language. Public fascination with the case only grew. A wave of commentary pieces debated judicial ethics. Could a judge remain impartial when presiding over matters involving his own child? Social media buzzed with hashtags like #HayesHug and #JusticeForEmily, with commentators divided between empathy for a grieving father and outrage at a perceived conflict of interest. Opinion polls conducted by regional news outlets showed nearly 60% of respondents believed Michael Hayes should have faced disciplinary action. 25% sided with those who saw his hug as a human response, not a judicial misstep. Meanwhile, defense investigators conducted interviews with neighbors who recounted quiet arguments late at night, though none reported physical violence before the shooting. Allen's team also motioned for an independent forensic review of the bullet trajectory, hoping to bolster the accidental discharge theory. The court granted this request, bringing in an expert witness from a private lab, but the subsequent report aligned closely with the state's initial findings. The shot angle and residue pattern suggested the gun was held in a raised position, inconsistent with a startled recoil. As opening statements approached, both sides prepared to present dueling narratives, one of a tragic accident born from misunderstanding and panic, the other of jealousy and a marriage stretched to its breaking point. The stage was set, not just for a courtroom battle, but for a community wrestling with its own expectations of justice, family, and the fragile line between them. When the trial commenced on December 2, 2024, the packed courtroom felt more like an arena than a venue for measured deliberation. Spectators filled every available seat, and overflow crowds watched via video feed in adjacent hearing rooms. Cameras, though barred from filming inside, lined the gallery's perimeter, poised to capture any public exchange. Deputy District Attorney Karen Liu opened the prosecution's case with a measured tone, telling jurors, "You will hear evidence of a marriage under strain, text messages revealing fear, and a death that cannot be undone. This is not an accident, it is a choice." Defense attorney Mark Allen followed, his voice steady. "Accidents happen. My client loved his wife. You will see that the evidence, up close, tells a different story, one of panic, not premeditation. The first witness was Sarah Mendoza, Emily's best friend, who described Emily's growing anxiety in the weeks before her death. Mendoza read passages from emails Emily had sent, expressing concerns about Robert's long hours and a sense that things were off. Under cross-examination, Mendoza acknowledged she had no first-hand knowledge of any physical altercation. Dr. Alan Chung, a forensic pathologist, called by the prosecution, delivered the autopsy findings: a single, close-range gunshot wound to the chest, angled slightly downward, suggesting the shooter stood over the victim. He noted no evidence of defensive wounds on Emily's hands, undermining the claim that she lunged at Robert. Next, the state's ballistics expert, Sergeant Laura Kim of the California Department of Justice, reconstructed the scene using photographs and a 3D model. She testified that the bullet's trajectory and the location of gunpowder stippling indicated the muzzle was within 2 feet of Emily's body when fired. In a dramatic turn, Robert took the stand in the 3rd week of trial. He recounted the argument that night, how Emily's tears had startled him, how he grabbed the gun in fear when she advanced toward him with raised hands. His voice wavered as he described the moment the weapon discharged. Jurors watched as he fought back tears, insisting, "I never meant to hurt her." The defense's private ballistics expert, Dr. Maria Santos, offered a nuanced perspective. While the gun was close to Emily, the pressure required to discharge the model in question could be applied even with a lighter grip, allowing that a startled recoil might have driven the slide back unintentionally. However, on cross, Sergeant Kim challenged the credibility of any theory that downplayed the clear residue patterns. In a poignant moment, Emily's sister, Laura Grant, described the aftermath: visiting the crime scene, seeing Emily's personal items undisturbed, and the haunting presence of her sister's scent on a scarf left on the desk. Her testimony underscored the human cost, transforming forensic debate back into personal tragedy. In her closing, DDA Liu revisited text messages Emily sent that night and forensic findings, concluding, "This jury must hold Robert Hayes accountable for a life taken, a family destroyed." Allen's final plea appealed to jurors' empathy: "If you have ever acted in fear, if you have ever made a mistake in a moment, then you know the difference between intent and accident." As the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom fell into a charged silence. Days later, after 14 hours of intense discussion, they returned with a verdict that would send ripples through Sacramento's legal community, and beyond. The jury returned on the morning of December 21, 2024. The atmosphere in Department 19 of Sacramento Superior Court was suffocating. Family members, reporters, law students, and curious citizens all sat shoulder to shoulder, their breath catching as the foreperson stood. Jurors' faces gave little away, some stared straight ahead, others fixed their eyes on the polished wood floor. Robert Hayes stood, flanked by his attorney and the court bailiff. His posture was stiff, as if trying to keep every muscle still. Judge Sharon Patel, presiding in place of his father, asked the jury for their decision. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Robert Hayes, guilty of second-degree murder." The words reverberated in the room. There was no audible gasp, just a stunned stillness. Robert blinked once, his lips parting slightly. Behind him, Emily's family exhaled in unison, clasping hands. Across the aisle, Robert's mother dropped her head into her hands. But it was what came next that would seize national attention. Judge Michael Hayes, seated quietly in the gallery for the verdict, stood and moved forward as the courtroom began to empty. He approached the well of the court slowly, almost hesitantly. Robert, still in handcuffs, was being escorted toward the side exit by deputies. The two locked eyes. In an unorthodox and deeply personal moment, the judge asked the officers to pause. The deputies, after a glance at their supervisor, complied. Michael Hayes stepped forward, and for 12 long seconds, he embraced his son. Cameras outside the courtroom caught the moment as photographers pressed up against the windows and doors. The hug, wordless, father to son, judge to convict, would become one of the most discussed acts in the entire case. Some would call it inappropriate, citing the need for judicial neutrality. Others viewed it as a deeply human gesture from a man who had spent a lifetime balancing the law with fatherhood, now watching that balance collapse. The Judicial Council of California released a brief statement the next day. Judge Michael Hayes recused himself from all legal matters related to his son's trial. His presence in court on the day of the verdict was as a family member, not as a judicial officer. Still, criticism came swiftly. Ethics watchdog groups questioned whether any judge could truly remove themselves from the shadow of their own bench. Some legal scholars argued that while the hug was not a breach of courtroom protocol, it had occurred after the verdict and sentencing phase had yet to begin. It nevertheless blurred the lines between private grief and public duty. That image, however, father and son locked in a silent farewell, would outlast the legal arguments. It became the subject of editorials, talk show segments, and social media debates. Was it a scandal? Or simply a moment of compassion no robe or title could prevent? As Robert was led away, the embrace ended. Michael Hayes remained standing, his hands at his sides, eyes on the floor. The courtroom emptied around him, but he didn't move for several minutes. And in that stillness, the country saw not just a fallen family, but a justice system pressed to its emotional limits. Within hours of the verdict and the judge's embrace, social media platforms ignited with debate. On Twitter, #HayesHug trended nationally, with thousands of users weighing in on whether the moment was a breach of judicial decorum or a simple act of paternal love. Memes juxtaposed the hug with images of Lady Justice, scales tipping under the weight of emotion. Facebook groups formed on both sides, one titled "Family First," the other "Justice Must Be Blind," each drawing passionate support and fierce criticism. Editorial pages across California voiced contrasting viewpoints. The Sacramento Bee's columnist argued that Judge Hayes had reminded us that beneath the black robe is a man whose heart can't be silenced by courtroom walls, applauding the display as a testament to familial bonds. Conversely, the Los Angeles Times warned that such public displays risk eroding public confidence, writing, "When judges allow personal allegiance to overshadow impartiality, the very foundation of our legal system trembles." National legal experts joined the fray. Professor Elaine Richardson of Stanford Law School noted that while the hug did not technically violate any specific code, given its timing after the verdict, it nevertheless challenges the expectation that judges maintain a clear divide between personal and professional identities. In contrast, constitutional scholar Henry Walters contended that the human moment should not be parsed as ethical violation unless actual procedural harm resulted. The hug, in and of itself, is neither crime nor contempt. Polls conducted in the weeks following showed a divided public. 52% believed Judge Hayes' hug was inappropriate, while 38% felt it was understandable under the circumstances, and 10% remained undecided. Interestingly, support for the judge was highest among older demographics, whereas younger respondents were more critical of any judicial display of emotion. Emily Hayes' family released a carefully worded statement: "While we respect the pain of a father grieving his son, our focus remains on Emily, her life, her students, and her legacy. We call for continued impartiality in the legal process and for justice that honors her memory." Their words were echoed by several victims' rights organizations, which urged the Judicial Council to review policies on judges' conduct in cases involving relatives. On talk shows and podcasts, legal analysts dissected every frame of the hug. Some labeled it a teachable moment, illustrating the tension between law and humanity. Others decried it as a symbol of bias, arguing that public trust requires judges to appear, if not be, entirely detached. Meanwhile, conservative commentator Sandra Mills praised the judge's courage. In a world of endless political correctness, Judge Hayes showed what it means to stand by family. In Sacramento's community, reactions were no less fervent. At local coffee shops, patrons debated over lattes and pastries. At the courthouse, advocates held peaceful demonstrations, some with signs reading, "Family First," others bearing placards stating, "Judicial Integrity Now." Amid the clamor, Judge Hayes remained out of the public eye, reportedly taking leave from his duties to spend time with family and seek counsel on his next steps. The aftermath of that embrace extended beyond headlines. It prompted discussions in judicial training programs, led to proposed amendments to California's Code of Judicial Ethics, and became a case study in law schools for balancing personal bonds with professional responsibilities. And as the dust settled, one fact remained clear: the Hayes case would leave an indelible mark on the conversation about where justice ends and family begins. Judicial conduct codes exist to safeguard the integrity and impartiality of the courts, yet they also acknowledge that judges are human, with personal lives that intersect with their professional roles. In California, the Code of Judicial Ethics mandates that judges must avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in all activities, and must act at all times in a manner that promotes public confidence in the integrity and impartiality of the judiciary. The question raised by Michael Hayes's actions is whether a post-verdict gesture, however private it felt, can be seen as an extension of his judicial office and thus in conflict with these principles. Long before the verdict, Michael Hayes properly recused himself from all substantive judicial duties in his son's case, including pre-trial motions, bail hearings, and evidentiary rulings, transferring authority to Judge Sharon Patel. This recusal aligned with established precedent: judges must step aside when their impartiality might reasonably be questioned, especially in cases involving family members. However, critics argue that recusal is only part of the solution. Even recused judges can influence outcomes indirectly, through their mere presence or the perceptions it creates among courtroom personnel and jurors. Here, Hayes's decision to attend the verdict hearing as a family member, and then to embrace his son in the courthouse, blurred those lines, reigniting debates over the sufficiency of formal recusal. Supporters emphasize that the hug occurred after the jury had rendered its verdict and before sentencing, a period when the judge's judicial functions had effectively concluded. No further rulings by Judge Hayes were pending in Robert's case at that moment. Technically, his judicial authority over the matter had been relinquished. Moreover, the hug lasted a mere 12 seconds and conveyed a universal human response, a father comforting his child in grief. To many, this narrow window of personal expression falls outside the scope of professional scrutiny. Ethics codes also focus on perception. The public must not only be sure that justice is served impartially, but must also believe so. The immediate backlash, 50+% in statewide polls deeming the hug inappropriate, highlights how quickly public confidence can erode when a judge's personal actions appear inconsistent with judicial detachment. Even if Hayes's intent was purely familial, the optics of a black-gowned jurist stepping into a familial embrace carries potent symbolism, one that risks undermining public trust in the impartial administration of justice. Under the California Commission on Judicial Performance's guidelines, a judge found to have violated ethics rules may face admonishment, censure, or, in extreme cases, removal from the bench. To date, the Commission has opened an inquiry into whether Hayes's conduct breached the code's provisions on impropriety. Historically, disciplinary actions involving emotional conduct by judges have been rare, and typically reserved for explicit misconduct, such as statements of bias or misuse of office. If the Commission finds that the hug constitutes an appearance of impropriety, the likely outcome would be a public censure rather than more severe sanctions. This would serve as a cautionary precedent, reminding judges of the narrow boundaries within which personal expression must operate. The Hayes incident has catalyzed discussions among judicial educators and professional bodies. Some have proposed clarifying amendments to ethics codes, explicitly addressing judges' attendance at family members' hearings and permissible post-verdict interactions. Others advocate for training modules that help judges navigate the tension between personal compassion and professional distance. Law schools are already incorporating the Hayes case into curricula, inviting students to debate scenarios where due process and family loyalty intersect. In the end, the heart of this analysis lies in balancing two fundamental truths. Judges, though guardians of the law, are not immune to personal grief, yet the judiciary's authority rests on an unshakable foundation of impartiality. Michael Hayes's embrace of his son crystallized this tension in a moment that was both deeply human and sharply consequential. Whether viewed as a breach or a bomb, the hug underscored a timeless question: when the scales of justice tilt under the weight of family, how do we measure the true cost of balance? As the courtroom emptied and the echoes of that 12-second embrace faded into memory, what remains is a story that transcends headlines and legal analyses. It is the story of a family laid bare before public scrutiny, of roles that collided, father, judge, son, and defendant, and of the enduring question of how love and duty can coexist under the unforgiving gaze of the law. For Judge Michael Hayes, a lifetime devoted to upholding justice met the most intimate of challenges, confronting the pain of a child found guilty of taking a life. His hug, in all its complexity, spoke to an elemental truth: even those sworn to serve justice are, first and foremost, human. And in that brief gesture, we saw a father's instinct to comfort, a judge's conflict of interest, and a society forced to reckon with the fragile boundaries we draw between public responsibility and private devotion. For Robert Hayes, the verdict marked not only the end of a trial but the beginning of an uncertain path. The hug was a momentary pause, a father's reassurance in a new world of loss, punishment, and reflection. As Robert navigates the consequences of his actions, his story will be defined not just by the court sentence but by the echoes of compassion and consequence that resound in that courtroom embrace. And for Emily Hayes, the echoes are quieter but no less profound. Her students, colleagues, and the community she served remember her warmth, dedication, and the unfulfilled promise of her life. In commemorations and memorials, her legacy endures, a testament to the unforeseen fragility of happiness and the enduring impact of a life devoted to others. Ultimately, this case leaves us with more questions than answers. How do we safeguard impartiality when those who interpret the law are themselves bound by blood? Where should we draw the line between empathy and ethics? And in moments when the personal and professional converge, whose voice should carry more weight, the call of justice or the call of the heart? As you reflect on the Hayes case, consider the delicate scales we each carry, balancing love, loss, duty, and desire. In the end, the truth is seldom simple, and justice, like love, demands that we weigh each moment with both rigor and compassion. Thank you for journeying with us through this story. If it moved you, challenged you, or made you question where you stand, share your thoughts below. And join us next time as we explore the stories that shape our understanding of right, wrong, and everything in between.